Hey everyone, welcome back. Excited to have you join us for another deep dive into tech history and its wild future.
Absolutely. Last time we wrapped up our talk on the 8 vital characteristics that shape these massive technological shifts. But today we're switching gears a bit. Today we're rolling back the clock, all the way to the early days of AI.
Absolutely. And we're going to dig for some insights from Dr. Alok Aggarwal's book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution and 100 Years of AI. He takes us through the evolution of AI from 1950 to 2050. It's wild to realize that so much of what's new today was actually being dreamed up decades ago.
Right? Those early AI pioneers were seriously ahead of their time.
They really were. Okay, so pop quiz. Picture HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Okay, that computer that could, reason, learn, and outsmart humans? It really captured people's imagination.
Totally. But did you know the filmmakers were actually inspired by a science fiction novel?
Oh, really? Which one?
The Sentinel by Arthur C. Clarke. And get this, a leading AI researcher at the time, Marvin Minsky, was actually an advisor on the film.
Wow, Minsky himself? That's a cool connection. Makes you wonder what he really thought about HAL. How realistic did he think that level of AI was back then?
Right? Especially since the film came out during this super optimistic period for AI research.
Yeah, those early days had a lot of buzz. People thought we'd have AGL-level AI by the year 2000.
Crazy to think about that now, but it shows how much excitement there was. And that brings us to this pivotal figure, the guy many consider the father of artificial intelligence, Alan Turing. Back in 1950, Turing asked this, really profound question: can a machine imitate human intelligence? And to try and answer it, he came up with something called the imitation game. You might know it better as the Turing test.
Oh yeah, the Turing test, where a computer basically tries to convince a human that it's another human just through text conversation.
Right? If the computer can fool the judge, it passes the test. Turing actually predicted it would take at least 100 years for machines to pass.
So we've got a few decades to go, I guess. But the Turing test, while important, isn't really the most important thing about Turing's work.
True. The test itself has its limitations. What's really remarkable is Turing's insight into how a machine might actually learn. He had this idea of child machines, computers that could learn just like kids do.
Fascinating. So feeding them information and letting them figure things out through trial and error?
Exactly. Sounds familiar, right? It's basically the foundation of how we train AI today.
Wow, so he was way ahead of his time.
Absolutely. While Turing was laying down the theory, folks like Marvin Minsky were diving into the practical side.
Right, Minsky was all about the hardware angle, wasn't he?
Exactly. He was inspired by how the human brain works, like neurons firing signals back and forth, and Minsky aimed to build machines that mimicked that complexity.
So simulating the brain structure. That's ambitious.
It was. In 1951, he and Dean Edmonds created SNARK, the world's first neural network using vacuum tubes.
Whoa, vacuum tubes. That's like ancient computer tech.
It's crazy, right? SNARK even managed to simulate a rat learning how to navigate a maze. But it also highlighted the limits of early tech. Imagine trying to replicate the human brain with those clunky vacuum tubes. It was a massive challenge. Yet, despite these hurdles, the early 50s were like AI's Big Bang, with a surge of breakthroughs happening all at once.
For sure. Like in 1950, Claude Shannon published his work on chess-playing computer programs, super influential stuff. But then just 2 years later, Arthur Samuel comes along and develops the self-learning checkers program. Can you imagine a self-learning program back then? That was a huge leap forward.
Totally, and the hits just keep coming. 1955, Newell, Simon, and Shaw create the logic theorist. This program was basically designed to mimic human problem-solving. It could even prove complex mathematical theorems. It's kind of mind-blowing. In just a few years, AI goes from "can machines think" to playing checkers and proving theorems. No wonder people were so optimistic.
Yeah, it definitely set the stage for the future. But Dr. Aggarwal points out something interesting in his book. He calls it hype cycles in AI.
Hype cycles? Okay, explain that.
Basically, the idea is that scientific progress isn't always, a straight line upwards. You get these bursts of excitement and big discoveries, but then these periods of disillusionment when the initial hype doesn't match the reality of what's possible and kind of set things up for a bit of a letdown later on. You get these super optimistic predictions, and sometimes the tech just isn't there yet to back them up.
I see. Is that what led to the so-called AI winter?
Exactly. The AI winter was this period of reduced funding and interest in AI research that followed the initial boom. It shows that even with the most promising tech, there are going to be ups and downs.
Which makes me think, are we in a similar hype cycle right now? I mean, AI is everywhere these days, from self-driving cars to those crazy creative chatbots. It feels like we're on the verge of some huge breakthroughs. But could we be setting ourselves up for disappointment again? What if those breakthroughs don't materialize as quickly as we hope?
It's a good question to ask and talk about the dangers of overenthusiasm and overinvestment, especially when it comes to AI. Think back to HAL 9000. The whole idea of the superintelligent machine really fueled a lot of hype, both in research and pop culture. But the reality of AI research is that it's super complex. Progress can be slow and unpredictable.
And when those super high expectations weren't met, it led to the AI winter. Makes sense. So how do we learn from that? How do we make sure we're harnessing the power of AI responsibly, learning from both the triumphs and the setbacks?
Well, one thing that stands out about those early AI pioneers is their focus on the fundamental questions. They weren't just trying to build cool gadgets. They were driven by this deep curiosity about the nature of intelligence itself. They wanted to understand how thinking and learning actually work.
So it wasn't just about building a machine that could play chess, but understanding how a machine could learn to play chess like a human.
Exactly. And that same spirit of inquiry, that desire to understand the fundamentals, it's crucial for how we approach AI today.
Okay, so keep asking the big questions. What is intelligence? How does the brain work? How can we create machines that truly learn? But what else can we learn from those early days?
Collaboration, those early AI breakthroughs, didn't happen in isolation. Researchers were constantly sharing their ideas, building on each other's work, learning from each other's mistakes.
A real community effort.
Exactly. That open and collaborative spirit is vital for continued progress in AI. The real magic happens when people from different fields, computer science, neuroscience, psychology, even philosophy, come together to share their perspectives.
Okay, so collaboration is key. But what about the practical side of things? AI is already having a huge impact on our lives. How do we make sure we're using this powerful technology responsibly?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's easy to get swept up in the excitement of new tech, but we need to be aware of the potential risks too.
You're talking about the whole robots taking over the world scenario?
Well, maybe not quite that dramatic, but there are legitimate concerns about things like job displacement, algorithmic bias, and the potential for AI to be used for harmful purposes. Those are things we need to be actively addressing.
So it's not just about building smarter machines, but building a better future with those machines. Sounds like a huge responsibility.
It is. AI has the potential to solve some of the world's most pressing problems, from climate change to disease. The key is to approach it with a sense of both wonder and caution. And it's something we all need to be thinking about, not just the scientists and engineers. AI isn't some far-off futuristic concept anymore. It's shaping our world right now.
So it's on all of us to be informed and engaged citizens in this AI-powered world.
Absolutely. And I also think it's time we addressed one of the biggest misconceptions about AI, something that pops up all the time in movies and the media. This idea that AI is all about recreating human intelligence in machines, the whole HAL 9000 thing. But in fact, focusing only on human-like intelligence might actually be holding us back from understanding AI's true potential. Intelligence comes in so many forms in the natural world. Think ants, elephants. Each species has its unique way of perceiving and interacting with the world. So why should AI be any different? We often think of intelligence as a one-size-fits-all concept, but maybe there are various types of intelligence, each with its strengths and weaknesses. A machine that's great at chess might not be great at composing music, and that's okay.
So instead of aiming for a super AI that can do everything, we should focus on developing specialized AI systems, each like an expert in its own field.
Absolutely. Exploring different models of intelligence could unlock endless possibilities for AI. Imagine AI that can help us understand complex systems like climate change or, the human brain itself, things we can barely even grasp right now.
Wow, that's mind-blowing. But it also makes me wonder, if we're creating these incredibly powerful AI systems, how do we ensure they're aligned with our values? How do we make sure they're used for good and not for harmful purposes?
Those are the big questions, right? And unfortunately, there aren't any easy answers. But that's exactly why we need to be having these conversations. While AI is still in its early stages, we have to think about the ethical implications right from the get-go.
It's like if you're building a house, you don't just start putting up walls without a solid foundation and a good blueprint.
Exactly. That blueprint has to go beyond the technical side. It needs to cover social, ethical, and even philosophical questions. We all need to be part of the conversation about the future we want with AI, not just leave it to the experts, because we're all in this together.
Absolutely. So next, we're diving into what many call the boom phase of AI.
Ah, the good old days when everything was new and full of promise.
Yep. We're exploring how those early AI pioneers envisioned the future and what their predictions were. It'll be interesting to see how those ideas stack up against where we are today. Starting with the Dartmouth Conference of 1956.
Ah, the Dartmouth Conference, a truly pivotal moment. That's basically where AI, as we know it, was born. Officially, anyway.
It was like a gathering of, the OG AI brainiacs.
10 of them, to be precise.
Right, 10. And you know who got them all together? This young Professor John McCarthy. He's the guy who coined the term artificial intelligence. He basically gave the field its name and set the stage for everything that followed. They had this really ambitious goal for the conference. It was like they wanted to make a machine that could think just like we do.
Can you imagine, back then, that must have sounded so futuristic?
Totally. These guys were so optimistic. They really thought the age of intelligent machines was right around the corner. And get this, in 1958, these two top researchers, Simon and Newell, they predicted that within 10 years, we'd have a computer as a world chess champion. They also thought a computer would be proving mathematical theorems by then, too.
So they were pretty confident in the power of computation, huh?
Big time. Makes you wonder, what made them think all that could happen so fast?
Well, back then, people thought mastering chess was mostly about, crunching numbers, and computers are awesome at that. I guess they hadn't quite realized how much intuition and strategy humans use when they play chess.
Okay, that makes sense. But it doesn't stop there. A few years later, in 1965, Herbert Simon, he claimed that in 20 years, machines would be able to do any job a human could.
Hold on. 20 years. Wow. That means they thought we'd have robot doctors and construction workers running around by the mid-80s.
And then it gets even wilder. In 1967, Marvin Minsky, he was a huge name in AI, said machines might even be smarter than humans within a single lifetime.
That's some next-level optimism right there.
Right. So looking back, what happened? Was it all just hype, or were they actually onto something?
Their timelines were definitely optimistic, but back then, the excitement around AI was huge. People didn't fully grasp how complex human intelligence is, and the computers of that era were nowhere near as powerful as today's machines.
It's kind of mind-blowing, right? And even though those predictions didn't happen exactly when they thought they would, they were sort of right, weren't they?
In a way, yeah. Think about it. We have self-driving cars now and computers that can beat the best humans at Go. So even if the details were off, the core idea that machines would become super intelligent, that was pretty spot on.
It's crazy to see how their predictions compare to today. Did they overestimate the timeline, or have we actually surpassed their wildest dreams? What do you think?
What I find fascinating is that even if those early predictions missed the mark, they fueled a lot of the research that followed. They really sparked imaginations and pushed the boundaries of AI exploration.
Great point. So looking at how far AI has come since the 50s, what wild predictions would you make for its future?
That's a tough one. AI's moving so fast, who knows what's next? But it's exciting to think about, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So in this next part, we're diving into how machine learning really took off. It wasn't just another step in computer science, it was a game changer. We usually think of computers as just following a set of instructions. But with machine learning, algorithms can actually adapt and evolve on their own. That's what makes it revolutionary.
Like, we're moving away from that old idea of just static instructions and into this world where things are dynamic, where computers can learn.
Exactly. And to really understand this, we've got to take a step back and cover some basics first. The algorithms, the sets of instructions that computers use.
And to think of it, the word itself has been around for a long time. It goes all the way back to a 9th century Persian mathematician, Al-Khwarizmi. And he kind of set the stage for how we think about problem solving in a step-by-step way, mathematically.
So algorithms have been around for a long time. But the game changer with machine learning is that unlike traditional algorithms which are fixed, these ones can actually adapt and evolve.
Early AI pioneers quickly hit a limit with traditional algorithms. They realized that achieving true intelligence would require machines to adapt and learn from experiences, much like humans do.
So that's where machine learning comes in, like computers that can actually learn and adapt.
Yeah. Computers that can learn and change their approach based on the data they see.
Great. So one of the things that I found really interesting was how Arthur Samuel, this pioneer of AI, said that machine learning gives computers this ability to learn without having to explicitly program them. Like, can you imagine that? Like algorithms that can actually change their internal structure based on what they're seeing and the data they process. So instead of just crunching numbers, they're like evolving. They're getting smarter as they work.
And that opens up so many possibilities.
All right, so machine learning was a real game changer. But how does it actually work? And are there different types of this so-called learning magic?
There are, and we can break it down into 3 main types: supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and reinforcement learning.
All right, break it down for me.
Let's start with supervised learning. Imagine you're trying to teach a computer to tell the difference between, pictures of dogs and cats, right? That's classic supervised learning. You're essentially supervising the learning process. You're giving the computer labeled data. You're saying, okay, this picture, this is a dog, this picture, this is a cat. And you're feeding that to the algorithm. You're giving it examples and telling it what those examples represent.
Okay, and then how do you know if it's actually learned anything?
Right, so to test it out, we divide this labeled data into 2 sets. We have a training set, which is like the study notes, and then we have a testing set, which is like the exam. And that lets us see how well the algorithm has learned to classify those images.
So it's like a student prepping for a test.
Exactly. They cram the material, and then they see what sticks during the exam.
Okay, that makes sense. So what about unsupervised learning?
Okay, unsupervised learning is a bit different. Here, you don't give the algorithm any labels. It's like giving it a puzzle with no picture on the box. And it has to figure out the patterns, structures, and the data all on its own.
So how does it even do that? Like without any guidance or labels, how does it learn anything?
Well, think about how Netflix figures out what you might want to watch next. That's unsupervised learning in action. It's called collaborative filtering. By analyzing your viewing history and comparing it to millions of other users, Netflix can group you with people who have similar tastes and then suggest movies that others in your group enjoyed.
That's seriously impressive. Okay, so we've got supervised, unsupervised, and then there's the third type.
Right? Reinforcement learning, which is all about learning through trial and error. Kind of like training a dog. You reward good behavior and you correct mistakes, basically. Learning from wins and losses. Imagine a reinforcement learning algorithm learning to play chess. You give it the rules of the game, and then you let it battle its own copy thousands of times.
So with each game, it's figuring out what works and what doesn't.
Exactly. With each win or loss, it refines its strategy. It's not just memorizing moves, it's developing a deeper understanding of the game through experience.
So it actually learns from its mistakes and gets better over time.
Yeah, just like we do in real life, but hopefully a bit faster. And this trial and error approach makes reinforcement learning really powerful. And it's great for tackling complex problems where there isn't just one right answer, but a whole bunch of possible outcomes to navigate.
Okay, so we've covered supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement learning. But I remember you mentioning something earlier called mixed learning. What's that all about?
That's where things get really interesting. It's like combining the best of all three types to tackle even trickier problems. Interesting. Think about those dog and cat pictures again. Instead of labeling all, 9,500 images for training, you could use a mixed learning approach.
How would that work?
You could start with unsupervised learning to group the images based on similarities, and then you only need to label a few, like on the edges of each group, to train a supervised learning algorithm.
So it's like using each type of learning where it's best.
Exactly. And that's just one example. We can really mix and match these techniques to create really efficient and powerful machine learning systems.
So we've gone from like the history of algorithms to these different types of machine learning. It's clear that this field is really changing how we think about computers and what they can do. But I guess the question is, why should all this matter to me?
That's a great question. And to really answer that, we need to look at how machine learning is already impacting our lives.
Okay, so like real-world examples, right?
Exactly. And that's what we'll look into. One of the really cool things about machine learning is that it's not just some abstract idea stuck in a lab somewhere. It's already out in the world. It's part of our daily lives, even if we don't always realize it.
That's what's so exciting to me about this. It's like it's not some future fantasy. It's like it's happening right now all around us.
Exactly. Think about the last time you shopped online. All those personalized recommendations? That's machine learning at work. It uses your past searches and purchases to suggest things you might like. It's amazing how much we rely on it without even realizing it.
But I have to admit, sometimes it feels a little, intrusive, like how much does this technology really know about me?
Right? It's a valid concern. As machine learning becomes more common, we definitely have to, think about those implications.
Yeah, because if these algorithms are learning from data and that data reflects our world, doesn't that mean they could also pick up some of the biases that exist in society too?
Exactly. That's why it's so important to have diverse teams building and testing these algorithms to make sure that they're fair and minimize any unintended consequences,
Okay, so there are some important things to consider, as this technology develops. But let's shift gears for a minute and talk about the positive side. Like, how is machine learning already making a difference in the world, for the better?
Oh, there are so many examples. Like in healthcare, it's being used to create personalized treatment plans, to catch diseases earlier, more accurately, even assist with surgery in some cases.
So it's not just about convenience and entertainment. This technology could actually save lives.
Exactly. And it goes way beyond healthcare. Take environmental science. It helps us track deforestation, predict natural disasters, even use energy more efficiently.
So it's like machine learning is giving us this incredible ability to understand and solve complex problems in ways we just couldn't before, right?
Precisely. And as the field keeps advancing, the possibilities just seem endless, But one thing's for sure, machine learning is pushing the boundaries of what's possible. And it's making us rethink what creativity and intelligence even mean,
It's all pretty mind-blowing. It feels like we're at right on the edge of this new era where machines they're not just tools, they're like partners in solving problems and coming up with new ideas.
Yeah, it's like this collaboration between humans and machines.
It's powerful, but with all this potential, there's also this sense of responsibility. We have to be careful about how we develop and use this technology.
For sure, it's like any powerful tool. There's always that potential for misuse. We really have to put human well-being above all else.
So it's not just about the technology itself, it's how we as a society decide to use it, right?
Exactly. We need to be having these open and honest conversations about the implications, the good and the bad, and work together to make sure this technology is actually used to create a better future.
Yeah, that's a powerful thought. It's a reminder that technology, it's not neutral. It's up to us to shape it, to make sure it serves humanity, not the other way around.
That's why it's so important for everyone to at least grasp the basics of machine learning. It's not just for, computer scientists. This is something that's going to impact all of our lives, and we all have a role to play in shaping its future. The future of AI, it's not going to be decided by a small group. It's something we got to figure out together as a society. It's time to ask those tough questions. about the values we want to build into these systems.
Moving on to the next segment, let's now explore the fascinating origins of AI, specifically the groundwork laid between 1950 and 1986. What's really cool about this is that it's not just dry history. It's about understanding the building blocks of the technology that's shaping our world right now. So, we're going to go beyond all the AI buzzwords and see how these early pioneers were already tackling the big challenges of making machines learn.
It's really remarkable to think about how much progress they made.
Yeah.
With the limited technology they had back then. For example, Dr. Aggarwal highlights the rise of statistical machine learning, and you might be surprised to learn that the theoretical foundation for this was actually laid way back in 1968 by Vapnik and Chervonenkis. Even earlier than that, they were building on research from 1936.
Wow, 1936? That's before computers as we know them even existed. So what does statistical machine learning even mean? It sounds pretty complex.
It might sound complex, but it's actually pretty simple. Instead of coding every rule for every scenario, machine learning teaches computers to spot patterns in data, much like how we learn from experience. Take email spam filters. Rather than manually setting rules, the filter learns to identify spam by analyzing patterns from millions of emails.
Oh, okay. So instead of telling the computer if an email contains the word free, it's spam, we're feeding it tons of data and letting it figure out the patterns on its own.
Exactly. And the really amazing thing is that this approach eventually led to the development of something called support vector machines.
Support vector machines.
You might not realize it, but you encounter this technology all the time. It's used in everything from facial recognition software on your phone to the handwriting recognition that banks use to process checks.
That's incredible. So we've got the theoretical foundation in place. But how did they actually start building these learning machines?
That's a great question, and this is where things start to get really interesting.
Yes, the book introduces us to the perceptron, developed back in 1957 by Frank Rosenblatt. And get this, it was directly inspired by the work of McCulloch, Pitts, and Hebb, who were studying actual neurons in the brain. So Rosenblatt's perceptron was essentially an attempt to create an artificial neuron.
Exactly.
It was a revolutionary idea for its time. And to understand how it works, picture a network of interconnected nodes, kind of like a spider web. You have an input layer where data enters the system, a hidden layer where the real learning magic happens, and an output layer where the results are produced. Each connection between these nodes has a weight assigned to it, and these weights determine how signals are transmitted through the network.
That makes sense.
So, it's kind of like a network of tiny switches that can either be on or off, depending on the strength of the signal coming through.
That's a great analogy. Just like a biological neuron sends an electrical impulse, when it's stimulated enough, a perceptron fires or activates if the sum of all the incoming weighted signals crosses a certain threshold.
Wow. So they were literally trying to mimic the way our brains learn, using these artificial neurons. That's mind-blowing for the 1950s. And to top it all off, Rosenblatt actually built a physical perceptron called Mark I that was capable of basic image recognition, a groundbreaking achievement for its time. It demonstrated the incredible potential of this new approach to machine learning. However, there were limitations. These early networks, called shallow networks, had only one hidden layer, which meant they could only handle relatively simple tasks. So they hit a wall because they couldn't make the networks more complex.
Well, they were able to make them more complex. In 1965, Ivakhnenko and Lapa expanded on Rosenblatt's work and developed something called multi-layer perceptrons, or MLPs. Think of it this way. It's like going from a single-story house to a skyscraper.
Ah, that makes sense. So these multi-layer perceptrons, or MLPs, were a game changer. What's fascinating is that they were developed in 1965 by Ivakhnenko and Lapa, but their initial work was actually published in Russian. And it wasn't until the U.S. Department of Commerce translated it in 1966 under the title Cybernetics Predicting Devices that it became more widely known. It's amazing to think about these groundbreaking ideas being hidden in plain sight, just waiting to be discovered.
It really highlights how scientific progress can sometimes depend on these unexpected connections and translations. What's remarkable is that Ivakhnenko and Lapa's early work already featured signals flowing both ways within the network. This bidirectional flow is crucial because it lets the network adjust and refine its understanding, much like a conversation, making it far more sophisticated.
Oh, interesting. So instead of just a one-way street of information,
We've got a two-way exchange going on, allowing the network to learn and adapt more effectively.
exactly. The brilliance of MLPs lies in their ability to learn complex patterns by stacking hidden layers. Each layer builds on the last, uncovering higher-level features, like a team of detectives, each specializing in different clues, working together to solve a case.
That's a great analogy. So how did we go from these multi-layer perceptrons to the deep learning networks we hear about all the time today? Seems like there's a missing link somewhere.
You're right, there is. The term deep learning networks didn't actually become popular until 1986. Researchers started experimenting with different activation functions within these multi-layered networks.
Activation functions.
And I know that sounds a bit technical, but think of it this way. Imagine you're editing a photo. You can apply different filters to highlight different features or create different effects. Activation functions are kind of like filters for these neural networks, allowing them to focus on specific aspects of the data and learn more complex relationships.
As researchers started incorporating these activation functions into these increasingly complex, multi-layered networks, they started calling them deep learning networks. And here's where it gets really exciting. These deep learning networks are now being used in all sorts of amazing applications, from self-driving cars that can navigate complex environments to medical diagnosis systems that can help doctors detect diseases earlier. It's incredible to think that the seeds of these world-changing technologies were planted decades ago.
And it's not just about the practical applications either. In 1971, Ivaknenko created a machine learning algorithm called GMDH, designed for multi-layered networks. It's a great example of how theory and practice go hand in hand.
Exactly. It's a constant back and forth, where each breakthrough leads to the next. And that's still happening today, as researchers experiment with new network designs and advanced learning algorithms.
So we've come a long way from those early perceptrons to the powerful deep learning networks that are transforming our world today.
Indeed it is. But remember, this is just the beginning of a much longer story.
Yeah, it's amazing to think that we've only just scratched the surface of the book and we've already uncovered so much about the history of AI. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on how we got to where we are today.
It really is remarkable, isn't it? Those early ideas, those seeds planted decades ago, have blossomed into the complex and powerful AI systems we have today.
Well, we covered a lot today, rolling back the clock to explore the early boom phase of AI. We dove into how machine learning transformed computer science from simple rule-following machines to adaptive, evolving systems. We talked about how the foundation for this revolutionary shift was laid between 1950 and 1986, setting the stage for everything we see today. But we're just getting started. Next time, we'll dive deeper into the different AI subfields that emerged between 1950 and 1975. We'll also explore how the 1970s and 80s sparked the beginning of commercial AI. So join us as we continue our exploration of those pioneering days that shaped the future of AI. See you soon.